Welcome back to my YouTube channel, everybody. I'm joined today by Alex Finley, who's a former CIA officer. She served in Europe and West Africa. She's now a writer, and she's writing a series of books. The main character's name is Victor Caro. The third book, Victor in Trouble, is about Russian influence in Europe, and I definitely recommend reading it. And today with Alex, we'll talk about war in Ukraine. Thanks for your time, Alex. Thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for being here,
Oh,
for inviting me here.
Oh yes, because this is actually the second time I invite you. I forgot to say that it's the second time you are my guest on this channel. Would you like to introduce yourself, to say something about your background before we start talking about the current war in Ukraine?
Well, I think you hit the main points. Like you said, I've been here before, so I'm thrilled you're having me back. And yeah, I write quite a bit now about Russian influence operations. I teach a course on Russian influence operations, and so I know quite a bit about what's happening over there and how they're trying to deflect and dismiss all of the reality that they actually are involved in. So there's a lot to talk about.
Absolutely. So let's start. So the first thing that I would like to ask you is, this war is now more than 1 year long. So Russia expected it to last a few weeks and to take the country over in a few weeks, but they failed totally. After a year, they're still fighting. How could Russia underrate Ukraine's reaction like that?
I think there's a few dynamics at play here. One, I think, is that in the lead up to this, Putin really had run a huge series of influence operations in Europe and in the United States in order to destabilize these democracies and to create wedges between them, to really try to break them up. And I think he thought that he had succeeded in that, so that the countries would not be able to unify and actually form a cohesive, supportive policy behind Ukraine. So I think he very much misunderstood what the outcome of his influence operations were, and he misunderstood or miscalculated just how unified the West was, and I hope remains. But then the other side of that, I think, is internal corruption. He first of all, he's hardly given any good information. Nobody wants to be the one to report to him bad news. So that plays into the influence operations in the West. And nobody is telling him that they're not necessarily working as well as he would like. But also within the military, then you have this corruption. So a very mighty Russian military existed on paper. But as you go down the chain, everybody's scraping a little bit off for themselves, to the point, as we saw as this war started. I mean, the Russian military were buying parts off of eBay, and just ridiculous stories, because so much money had been siphoned off through corruption that 10 tanks that exist on paper don't exist in real life. And so in the end, the military is much weaker than Putin probably thought that it was, and that anybody was willing to tell him that it was. And I think that corruption remains rampant throughout, to the point now where the Russian military, I mean, they're practically marching in there with spoons at this point. I literally just saw, before joining you, they're pulling out from the mothballs like tanks from the 1950s. They just don't have the weapons for this.
Well, we also keep hearing in the news that Russia is losing bits and pieces. They're losing a lot of soldiers. Ukraine also is facing a lot of losses in their army. So how long can Russia bear this, in your opinion?
To put it really coldly, I think, actually, because the one thing that Putin is very willing to put in is more people, more men. He'll just keep throwing them in. So I think in the end, it's a question of Ukraine having more bullets than Russia has men. I understand that's a crude and cold way of putting it, but I really think that's what it is. Putin doesn't care how many of his own people he kills. So he'll just keep throwing people in, and this has happened throughout Russian history, so it's not a new thing. He'll just keep marching people in there as long as he can, and so it'll be a question of Ukraine having enough resources behind it to just keep fighting.
Okay, at the same time, Russia is threatening to extend the war to other countries, such as Moldavia or Georgia. So, can Russia really bear two wars at the same time?
Yeah, I think there's a few different things also that are going on. I think one is a bit of saber rattling. It's an attempt by Russia to um, try to scare off the West, and in fact we've heard it working in some ways where a number of people in the West say, "Oh, we need to stop supporting Ukraine because it's threatening Putin, and he's just going to do worse things." Well, he's already doing terrible things. He's already invaded a country. He's already stealing children from that country. So it's hard to say, well, he'll escalate. I mean, he's already escalated. But like you said, it's not that he necessarily has the resources militarily to go into these countries. So I think a lot of it is saber rattling, and it's a political tactic. I think part of it is to distract and to keep the eyes elsewhere and not always on Ukraine. But I think also places like Georgia and Moldova, especially, there's also, of course, this information war that's going on at the same time, and I think this plays into it. Because a lot of what they were talking about with Moldova, for example, wasn't military. It was very similar to what Russia tried in Macedonia in 2016, excuse me, Montenegro in 2016, which was to foment a coup, which was to spread so much disinformation, cause violence and chaos in the lead up to the parliamentary elections that, in fact, this a violent vacuum would be created, and then a pro-Russia government could move in. It failed in Montenegro, but the plans that we've seen coming out of Moldova are very similar. And so that isn't necessarily a military move that they would be doing there, but it could be one of these influence operations that we're seeing where they are using proxies, they're using right-wing groups, and they're using disinformation and other information warfare tactics to create this chaos and to cause problems in the country.
But what ways out of this war do we have? Is there an internal revolt against Putin the only way to stop this?
I think so. I think as long as Putin is alive, this war will go on.
Wow, that's scary. Aren't economic sanctions doing anything useful?
I think that they are. I mean, I don't know the statistics of what exactly is happening with the Russian economy, but the main idea, there's a few things. So, the main idea behind a lot of the sanctions, particularly on the oligarchs, for example, and other members of the elite, is to create this pressure against Putin to destabilize that corrupt system that exists inside Russia to support Putin and keep him in power.
Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
Okay, so the more you destabilize that with sanctions, the more those that support system starts to fall apart. I think we've already seen a little bit of that because we have seen a number of oligarchs making very concerted efforts to get their assets back in the West. I think now when you add to that this recent indictment from the International Criminal Court now on Putin, he is now an indicted war criminal. They see their options narrowing even more. And so the benefits that Putin used to be able to offer them no longer exist. And so it becomes less beneficial to them to support Putin. On top of it, you have the other economic sanctions that affect sort of the whole country and affect the military, affect technology, affect Aeroflot, where they can't get spare parts. And so we are starting to see some of the ripple effects of those things where we do start to see a few industries having trouble getting the parts that they need.
Okay, let me ask you something different. We as West, we're giving weapons to Ukraine to defend themselves. But are we also facing the danger that these weapons, sooner or later, will fall in the hands of extremist groups who can use them against the legitimate government or even against other nations? I'm thinking about what is going on in Afghanistan with the Taliban that stole, with their second rise, weapons left behind by the Americans. Can something of the sort happen in Ukraine as well?
I mean, I suppose there's always a chance, but the setup on the ground in Ukraine is very different than what we were seeing in Afghanistan or Iraq, for example, where you had a number of different proxies, you had all kinds of different militia that were fighting. Here in Russia, you really have, two states up against each other, and you have a foreign legion and you have a few others, but I think that everybody's sort of under the command and control structure of an actual state government. So I think that there's less of a chance of that. And then all of the weapons that are going in, it's not like in Afghanistan where it was the US bringing in weapons and then left very quickly and couldn't get them out, so that they were sort of abandoned. Here, your weapons are coming in very much again state to state. So, the US is providing directly to the government of Ukraine. Germany provides directly to the government of Ukraine. So all of these weapons are actually under the control of the government of Ukraine.
Okay. Well, let's go to the Russian propaganda argument. So if I turn on the TV every night on the Italian TV, I see someone supporting Putin being invited to talk shows or things of the sort. So are editors stupid, or is corruption part of it? Because in Italy, this is like huge. They're even on the state TV.
Well, I think the answer is different in all kinds of different places. Part of it, I think, is a desire by journalists and media outlets to really try to show both sides. I don't think that it's the right argument, because it's not showing both sides. It's showing one side that's true and one side that is spreading lies. And I also think that when democracy is on the line, that kind of temporal, trying to temper both sides doesn't work. It just doesn't work in that kind of paradigm. In a place like Italy, you have a few other things that are going on. Italy has very much been the target of a number of Russian influence operations. We've seen through a number of investigations and leaked documents, very specific people inside Italy who have been targeted for influence by the Russians. This goes from the top all the way down to very local and regional governments. The OCCRP recently did an investigation actually showing how a local regional, I'll have to recall all the specifics, but a regional politician, I believe, up in the Northeast, helped get legislation passed saying that Crimea was Russian, and the whole legislation was actually written by Russians, and they paid him to get that passed. So, Italy has a very different sort of relationship with Russia than some other places. So some of it is organic and real, where people really think, I think Russia is an okay place. Others, it's, they're paid. That's it. They're paid to do it.
Okay, that's very clear, and that's what I feared as well. Let me ask you something else on this topic, because talk shows on TV are not the only problem we have here in Italy with Russian propaganda, because, of course, we also have politicians supporting Russia. For instance, there are at least three parties, which are Forza Italia, the Movimento 5 Stelle, and Lega, who claim we should stop giving weapons to Ukraine because instead of working for the peace, we're actually making things escalate. I would like to ask you what you think about this nonsense. And second, again, are they stupid, or is corruption, is Putin's influence part of it?
Well, again, I think some of it probably is organic. Some of them really believe it, but I think absolutely some of these parties have been infiltrated with influence. I mean, it's not a secret that Putin really has launched these operations. Like, it's not a fake thing, it's a real thing. We have the evidence to show that Russian intelligence have gone out, tried to recruit politicians, infiltrated right-wing groups. We know that Salvini, traveled to Moscow and is, was kind of friendly with Putin. Some of these, they haven't made it, they haven't tried to hide it. But they have tried to hide some of the other side as to why they're doing it. There's still an investigation in Italy going on about Russian money flowing into Lega and helping Lega with their European parliamentary elections. that's just one investigation that we know about. So the amount of money that Russia is putting into influencing our politicians is enormous. These are not small operations; they're huge, and they're still going on, and they work sometimes.
Oh yeah, we have a bad government, but things can also get worse if these three parties go to the government together. Something I started asking only recently is, what do you think about President Zelensky and how he's leading the country? Because I understand he's doing pretty much a good job, but he also gets some criticism because he shows himself off a little bit too much. What do you think?
I think he's doing a very good job, particularly for somebody who came in, look, without a lot of political experience. Um, I think he probably has some good people around him because militarily they seem to be doing well. But I also think that his background on the stage and in entertainment has helped because so much of this war has been an information war. And so he knows how to play the message. He knows how to play with visuals. Um, he knows how to make himself look presidential. He knows and understands the sort of the points that he's going to score by showing up. He showed up today in Bakhmut. He's out of the bunker. He's out with his men. He's out fighting with his soldiers. And Putin, meanwhile, we see these images of him at this enormous long table, totally isolated and sitting alone. So it really shows a difference in what their leadership styles are. And I think for Zelensky that it's working very well.
Well, let me ask you something very difficult. What should we expect from Russia in the next few days or weeks? Are they trying to escalate things at an even higher level just to unblock the situation they got stuck into?
Yeah, we hear a lot in the media how Ukraine is really doing better than we thought, but we need to understand this is still a very long and drawn out conflict. It's not ending anytime soon. I think we probably should be giving more to Ukraine to help them win rather than just helping them hold where they are. Putin is ready to put everything into this that he has to. So it will remain a violent conflict as long as it needs to. How he'll escalate or what means he's going to use to do that going forward, I'm not sure. I think the more cornered he feels, the more violent he'll get. So I'm not sure we can rule anything out, but I also don't think that means we need to stop and be scared and say, well, just give him whatever he wants. He needs to be stood up to.
No, absolutely. The answer in that case would have been, let's fight him even stronger. Thanks for your time, Alex. Thanks for your very precious explanations and for your very unique angle.
Thank you. Appreciate you having me here.
My pleasure. Thanks, everybody, for watching this, and see you all next time. Bye-bye.